Hello, my name is Albert Garcia, and I'm a librarian with the Contra Costa County Library. And thank you for being here for today's program, 2026 Elections, A Changing Landscape. Today's program does have a Spanish interpretation. And to explain how to turn that function on, I'm now going to invite our Spanish interpreter, Vanessa Cardenas, on to explain how to turn that function on. Vanessa?
Thank you, Albert. Buenas tardes, damas y caballeros. En esta reunión, ustedes tendrán la oportunidad de tener acceso a la interpretación al español. Solo necesita presionar el símbolo terráqueo en su pantalla o puede buscar los tres puntitos para seleccionar el idioma al español. Estamos a sus órdenes. Gracias por unirse a nosotros. Thank you and back to you.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm now going to share my screen. Before I hand it over to the league, I do have some information I'd like to share about the library. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Library of Things. This is a special collection the library has. It's non-traditional items that we have that circulate, including these outdoor explorer backpacks that have binoculars and trail guides, as well as an East Bay Regional Park pass that allows you to go out and experience our local parks and areas. We also have energy efficiency toolkits to test your home, as well as mini computers called Raspberry Pis. We have a ukulele that you can check out, learn how to play a new instrument. We also have story to go kits. These are kits that allow you to have a story time at home, Wi-Fi hotspot that you can check out and circulate. They circulate for 3 weeks. And we also have California State Library park passes. These work at all the California State park passes that require a pass. And these are all items that you can check out at your local library or request them through the website. One of the final items that we have here is our STEAM kits for kids. It's another one that we really, really like. And so all of these are on the Library of Things page if you want to check those out on our website. The Contra Costa County Library is happy to connect you with our resources, services, and materials at all 26 branches. Access more than 1 million physical items, including international language collections, and thousands of digital materials 24/7 at ccclib.org. Visit any library to use our public computers, printers, and free Wi-Fi, and go to our website and sign up for a digital library card today. Okay, I'm now going to pass the program over to Sean. Thank you, Sean, for being here.
Thank you very much, Albert. Love the library, especially the used bookstore part. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Gilbert. On behalf of the League, on behalf of Contra Costa County Library, the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley, the League of Women Voters West Contra Costa County, and Contra Costa TV. Welcome to this community conversation webinar, 2026 Elections, A Changing Landscape. A reminder, this is a Zoom webinar, so audience members' microphones are muted and videos are turned off. If you have questions for our presenters today, please submit them by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Today's webinar is being recorded live. It will be posted later to the YouTube channel of the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley. Site address for that YouTube channel will be displayed on screen at the end of the program. Additionally, Contra Costa Television is broadcasting today's webinar and will be rebroadcasting the program. The dates and times will be posted on screen at the end of the webinar. Contra Costa Television is available to watch on Comcast Channel 27, AT&T UVerse Channel 99, Astound Channel 32, and online at ContraCostaTV.org. The contact information for today's presenters, along with the date and subject of our next community conversation, will also be posted at the end of this program. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and to ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. The League empowers voters and defends democracy through advocacy, education, and litigation at the local, state, and national levels. The League of Women Voters of the United States believes that a democratic government depends upon informed and active participation at all levels of government. We invite you to join the League of Women Voters and support its work. You can join the League by visiting lwvc.org/join. The League of Women Voters of the United States believes that voting is a fundamental citizen right that must be guaranteed. Our award-winning voting and election resource, vote411.org, provides reliable, nonpartisan information in both English and Spanish, including candidates' information, voter registration and verification, details about your unique ballot, and how to vote in your state. In 2024, more than 9 million people came to Vote 411 for election information on over 29,000 races nationwide. Please consider using vote411.org to get informed before voting in the upcoming June 2nd primary election. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's two wonderful presenters, Janet Hoy and Valerie Ventre-Hutton. Janet Hoy has been involved with the League of Women Voters for over 13 years, working in education and advocacy, primarily focused on elections, but also getting involved in local issues with leagues in both North Carolina and California. Janet's professional background was in the health insurance industry, working for insurance companies in a variety of regional roles and working for a large integrated hospital system in San Diego. Valerie, after years using and referring others to the League of Women Voters, outstanding voter guides, Valerie became an active member of the Diablo Valley chapter in 2024. Her league work focuses on voter education and legislator outreach. Before retiring, Valerie served as a human resources manager at the University of California, Berkeley, go Bears, managing policy and employee labor relations. Prior to the university, she worked in the private and non-profit sectors, including international management, consulting firms, and labor unions. Janet, Valerie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sean. Give me just a moment and I am going to get the presentation up. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
That's good. Okay, great. So thanks to Sean and Diane and the Diablo Valley League, as well as thank you to the Contra Costa County Library for hosting this. And as Sean said, this is about things that are happening, not necessarily in California, but across the country, about will impact voting. They could be happening at the federal level, they could be happening at the county level, they can be happening at the state level. And although we may not feel them yet, we do understand that they can have and probably will have a big impact on our voting. So we thought this would be a timely topic to share with you folks. So Valerie and I are going to share this. I'm going to do a few slides, then she'll do a few slides. We absolutely love to get questions. So please enter your questions in the Q&A. So let me get started. Sean talked a little bit about the League. We're with the League of Women Voters of Diablo Valley. And the League is an over 100-year-old organization. We were founded in 1920 with the enfranchisement of women. And we have spent the time since then helping educate voters on a variety of topics while always maintaining our focus on voting and elections. We are strictly nonpartisan. And by that, we mean we never, ever support or oppose candidates or parties. We are nonpartisan, but we are not neutral. And we advocate and educate on issues and policies that are not only central to our mission, but also, we think, really central to our citizens and the voting population to understand what's going on in our own communities and what's happening across the country. We very much invite you to join us, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. Okay, the League is at the forefront of many important cases across the United States, and we thought we'd let you know sort of where we stand on some of the issues. You might not be surprised at all that the League works to oppose all forms of voter suppression. You may have heard that term voter suppression before, and maybe not been clear on exactly what it means. Voter suppression can mean a whole variety of things. It can mean discriminatory voter ID laws, meaning they impact some groups more than others. It can mean making voter registration more difficult. It can mean last-minute election day barriers, like suddenly a polling place is closed or the rules around where you go to vote have changed and there has not been good communication about it. It might mean that there are drop boxes where you drop off your ballots. There might not be very many drop boxes near where you live. It could be the actual elimination of voting locations that particularly seems to hit hardest in underserved communities. It could be voter purges, meaning a review of the voter rolls and kicking people off because it is suspected that they are not qualified to vote. And it could be attempts to limit access overall, but particularly to early voting and to mail-in voting. These are all forms of voter suppression, and we're going to be reviewing them and what's happening at different states and at the federal government level around these voter suppression issues. So we also want to be upfront about exactly where we stand on a number of issues, many of which you may have heard about. We very much oppose the SAVE, or as it's now called, the Save America Act. And we're going to talk about the provisions of that act and why we oppose it. We oppose the release of personal voter information. Some of you may know that the Department of Justice approached the state of California demanding that we turn over our voter rolls. Unredacted, meaning we would not take out we would not be allowed to take out any information that would either be personally identifying, social security number, etc., and also include information on party, etc. And we decided, LWVC, so our statewide organization, went to court against the Department of Justice and won, so that we did not have to release personal voter information to the federal government. And our concern was, if the federal government got that information, and I should say this is happening across the country, that there would be an effort to purge the rolls of people that somehow were considered to be not eligible. So we were able to prevent that. The League has been involved for quite a long while in attending naturalization ceremonies. And we generally are outside the room. We're not allowed to be in the room where people take their oath. But instead, we, like other organizations, sit at tables outside where people are being naturalized, and we help people register to vote after they're naturalized. And I've been to a number of these things, and I've heard from other people, these are really important and moving ceremonies, and people are so proud to be new citizens. And for many of them, one of the most important things for them to do as soon as they become a citizen is register to vote. So there is a law that says the League and other organizations like ours are no longer allowed to do that at naturalization ceremonies. We oppose mid-cycle redistricting, and we're going to talk about redistricting a little further in the presentation. And you guys probably remember we just passed Prop 50 in November to do mid-cycle redistricting. We'll talk a little bit about that. We oppose Equal Representation Act. This is something that is in a House committee. It has not yet been presented at the floor of the House or passed. But what it will do is add a question about citizenship on our census, and it would be an attempt to not count U.S. non-citizens in the census. And I'm sure you all know, according to our Constitution, the census, which happens every 10 years, is a count of every person who's in the U.S. And we are concerned, as other organizations are concerned, that if there is a citizenship question on the census, that people will not fill out the census, and we will get a significant undercount because people will be concerned that they indicate there are non-citizens in their households, they will be concerned that they will be deported. So they will not answer that question on the census. We support the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We'll talk about that one. And we oppose all forms of voter ID. And some of you may know there will likely be a voter ID initiative on our November ballot.
Okay.
So here I turned it over to Valerie.
Thank you. So today, where are we going to focus? We're going to review the current landscape and give you just some context at the federal, state, and local levels. We're going to zoom in on a few federal initiatives and review some key Supreme Court cases, and we're going to look at the state and county initiatives. And we're going to end with a call to action. Janet? So, a key important point is the U.S. election system is highly decentralized across federal, state, and county levels. There are 10,000 election jurisdictions nationwide, and there are pros and cons to decentralization. And one of the big ones is if you're this decentralized, it's harder to hack. Decentralization helps keep our elections, actually, they're less vulnerable to outside interference, but it also means there's greater variation in how elections are handled, state to state, and even from county to county. But despite a decentralized system, there are key pieces of federal legislation that support our election structures, and we're going to review some of those. Janet? The three main federal statutes are the 1965 Voting Rights Act. This is the key landmark voting rights law. It negated Jim Crow voter discrimination laws. We're going to look more closely at this particular law in a minute. The other two important laws are the 1993 National Voter Registration Act, and this is the motor voter law. This tells you Americans love to drive. It required states to offer voter registration at their DMV, and it required states to offer mail-in voter registration. It also required that a chief election officer be established for each state. And in California, it's our Secretary of State who's the chief election officer. The third key law was only established in 2002, and it's Help America Vote Act. And this law was passed in response to the problems that surrounded the George Bush and Al Gore election. The law established uniform procedures for voter registration. It centralized overall administration of voter lists at the state level, no longer at the county level. And it established machine system standards for voting machines. And it actually set aside some funding for voting equipment. Janet? The 1965 Voter Rights Act is as important as the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. The 15th Amendment in particular was often sabotaged by discriminatory state voting laws until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So there are many important sections of this act, but there are two that are especially important right now. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act prohibits voting practices or procedures that discriminate on the basis of race, color, or membership in a language minority group. It outlawed literacy tests and challenged the use of poll taxes in state and local elections. There is currently a case in front of the Supreme Court that will decide if Section 2 is constitutional, and that will be discussed later in the presentation. Section 5 of the Voter Rights Act is called preclearance, and it required that certain jurisdictions with a history of racial discrimination in voting practices had to get pre-cleared. They had to get federal approval before changing state voting laws. And according to the Brennan Law Center, this was a unique provision, and it worked. By the way, some counties in California and New York State were covered by Section 5. Well, in 2013, Section 5 was struck down by the Supreme Court. And the court ruled it was unconstitutional, and the rationale was that it was based on electoral conditions that were in place in the 1960s and 70s, but that were no longer in place in 2013. And this imposed unequal burdens on some states. And Janet, you have an anecdote about this, do you not? I believe from North Carolina.
I do. I was involved with the League of Women Voters in North Carolina, and one of the big issues was around um, voting and some changes that were going to be happening. And North Carolina, some of the North Carolina polling areas and precincts and counties did indeed have to adhere to pre-clearance requirements. So if they were going to make changes to voting laws, they had to have them approved in advance by the Department of Justice. So in 2013, the Supreme Court struck that down. They said no longer do you need to have pre-clearance. And the California legislature was ready with what we called the monster voting bill. And that monster voting bill did a number of things, including doing away with early voting, changing the way voting happened, requiring IDs when you voted, etc. A whole list of things that, in our view in North Carolina, just made it very, very difficult to vote and was indeed instances of voter suppression, putting barriers in front of people to giving them the ability to vote. So it was a really big deal. And I only raised that because it was so incredible to me that the legislature had prepared already in advance before the Supreme Court decision was out that if they struck down the pre-clearance provision, that they were ready with laws that were going to be implemented immediately. Now, many of those laws, I should say, were struck down by courts as well. But the amount of confusion that people had when they showed up to the polls because they had heard about all these changes. And people would show up at the polls thinking and asking, do I need ID? What kind of ID do I need? Etc. So it created an awful lot of confusion and an awful lot of challenges for people who were just trying to exercise their vote.
And Janet, you said California instead of North Carolina. You
I'm
meant
sorry,
the
North
Monster
Carolina.
Voting Act took place in North Carolina, right? They were prepped
Yes,
immediately.
yes. And I'm just going to add one other thing too. Once Section 5 was struck down, there was a big impact. Since 2013, the turnout gap, meaning the difference in levels of voting for Black versus white voters, grew almost twice as quickly in those areas that had before been subject to pre-clearance compared to all other areas. So that's pretty, frankly, alarming in terms of people's exercise of their vote.
Next slide, please. So, excuse me, where are we now? Well, some of the issues we are looking at now at the congressional level, we're looking at the SAVE Act. We'll talk about that in depth in a minute. There are also executive orders. And one of those orders that was issued in March 2025 was the documentary proof of citizenship. And it was struck down in October, but it's important to look at because a number of states, including, as Jenna said, California, are looking to enact these types of laws. So what did the federal documentary proof of citizenship, what would this executive order have done? Well, it requires you show specific forms of documentation that prove citizenship, physical documentation, in person at the registrar's office in order to register to vote. For example, real IDs, California real IDs, are not acceptable because they don't say that we're citizens. Some states do, those would be acceptable. This executive order would attempt to ban mail-in voting. It would allow the DOJ to withhold funds from states that don't cooperate, don't share the data. When Kansas attempted to implement a similar DPOC initiative, in 2013, nearly 1 in 8 eligible voters were denied registration because they didn't have access to the necessary documents. At the federal level, at the DOJ, there has also been some shifts. The DOJ has moved away from protecting voters and voter rights, and instead is focusing on prosecuting election-related crime and what they perceive as voter fraud. And by the way, this shift was called for by Project 2025. Next slide, please. The SAVE Act. Safeguard America Voter Eligibility Act. This act passed the House of Representatives, but it's stalled in the Senate, and we've heard it's unlikely to pass. But the fact is, 23 states have recently changed voting procedures to mirror some parts of the SAVE Act. So we're going to review some of the elements. The SAVE Act requires you to show a physical document, such as a passport or a birth certificate, to prove citizenship in order to register to vote. Again, it's a physical document you'll have to show. The Brennan Center for Justice reports that 21 million Americans lack easy access to these necessary documents. So roughly half of Americans don't have a passport, and millions lack access to a paper copy of their birth certificates. And if your name has changed, like mine, and your name now doesn't look like your name on your birth certificate, you have to take extra steps. And so 69 million women lack paperwork to validate their citizenship status. And the other thing is the bill will require proof of residence in order to register. And what does that mean? It means you have to have certain forms. Your street address has to be in a certain form. Well, it turns out that many Native Americans living on reservations do not have acceptable forms of street address because the federal government doesn't issue these forms of street address. The state and the county issue them. And if you move, we know we have to re-register in California, but if you move and this act is in place, you have to once again go in person with your documentation to prove your citizenship. And the act would require all male voters to submit an application in order to receive a vote by a mail ballot. Next slide, please. Janet.
Yes. So we're going to spend just a minute on redistricting because, as Valerie stated, was one and one that's pending, very important Supreme Court cases having to do with redistricting. So we thought we'd do a little redistricting 101 quickly. So redistricting is the term that is used to describe redrawing of congressional and legislative lines around communities throughout the state to determine the congressional or legislative districts. It typically takes place a year or so after the decennial census. So every 10 years, we do the census. We talked about that a little bit with that question about citizenship and sort of making the numbers different if that were to come to pass. It happens at the end of 10 years, and then that the data from the census is looked at, and they determine based on the total number of people living in the state, citizens and non-citizens, that's what it says in the Constitution, how many representatives you get for the House of Representatives, how many representatives you are allocated by state. So if you lose the number of people, as we did as of the last census, we here in California, you would lose representation. If you gain in terms of number of citizens, you would gain representation. Now, most states, not California, but in most states, once that census is completed, the redistricting process is determined exclusively by the state legislature. So in fact, that's true in 33 states. So the state legislatures, whether they're Republican or Democrat, have an incentive to draw lines that favor their party and that favor the incumbents in their party because they want the incumbents to stay in office. This is not good or bad. It is the way it is and the way it has been. So in 33 states, it's determined by the state legislature. And if you remember, last November, when we voted on Prop 50 to redistrict, mid-cycle redistricting in California, we voted on it. We were doing that in response to what happened in Texas. And in Texas, the administration wanted to increase very openly and transparently, wanted to increase the number of Republican seats in Congress at the next election that's coming up, our primaries in June, and then the November election. Wanted to do that. So the administration encouraged Texas and other states to redistrict in ways that would favor Republicans. The state of Texas did not have to go to the voters the way California had to come to the voters to ask us if we wanted this to happen or not. Instead, they just did it. And we, in turn, based on the leadership of our governor at the time, now and then, we in turn decided to redistrict as well, but it came to the voters for us to determine whether we wanted to do that or not. So big difference in terms of how that was handled. But in 33 states, district lines are determined with the state legislature. 9 states, commissions are used, like in California. California is one of the few states that has an independent redistricting commission, that at the end of that 10-year cycle, the census is done, then that commission determines the congressional and legislative lines up and down the state. And they do it in ways that are equally balanced in terms of partisanship and recognize and support communities of interest up and down the state. And in fact, some of you who are on this webinar might have been in some of the meetings when the commission comes to your town to talk about drawing those lines. 2 states have a hybrid process, and this always sort of makes me smile. The remaining states, I think they're just 2 of them, are small enough they only have a single district, so they don't have to redistrict or district at all. So again, just in summary, this is the process that is used to determine the districts for the House of Representatives and our legislature. And not to put too fine a point on it, but when the states do it and they determine those lines and they just have the state legislature do it, they do it to favor their own party. Whether they have an R after their name or a D after their name, that's how they do it. What has changed in recent times is the use of computers in helping draw those lines in very particular ways so that you can include or exclude certain neighborhoods, certain homes, certain universities to make sure that you have the voters you want in the maximum number of districts across your state. So that's redistricting. So as you know, because we just talked about Texas and California, there is a fair amount of mid-decade redistricting happening across the country. It's been enacted here and in Texas. It was enacted in North Carolina. It was enacted in Missouri. 3 states, Ohio, Utah, and Virginia, are in process of making that happen. I think actually Virginia just completed it. I'm not positive, but I think they just completed it. It is being considered in the 5 states that are listed. And it might happen after this year, so after the midterm elections in Colorado, New York. So the states where it's enacted or it's in process, it could still impact the midterm elections. And that was the intent when this was all started in Texas. Okay, so here's the Supreme Court of the US. And we talked about 2 cases that are both redistricting cases. The first one was Rucho versus Common Cause. And the League of Women Voters North Carolina was a plaintiff in that case as well. And that was decided at the Supreme Court in 2019. And this was the consolidation of 2 cases, one in North Carolina and one in Maryland. And North Carolina was what it was called a partisan gerrymander in favor of Republicans. And Maryland was a Democratic gerrymander in favor of Democrats. So the allegation was partisan gerrymandering in those maps. And it was a 5-4 decision divided along ideological lines. And the ruling was that the federal courts cannot review allegations of partisan gerrymandering as they are outside this jurisdiction of the federal court. So the federal court, the Supreme Court, said, out of our jurisdiction, we cannot determine this. So it left in place both of those maps that were completely favoring one party over another. And again, this is not a Democrat or Republican thing. This happens across the board. But in these cases, they were pretty egregious. The second case is Louisiana versus Calais. And this one is currently being, it's under review. It's pending with Supreme Court. We expect that it will be decided by June, which is the end of the session. Mm-hmm. This is a case where in Louisiana, which is over a third African American, civil rights groups sued the state over the dilution of Black voters. There are 6 districts there. There was 1 African American district, which is referred to as a majority-minority district. They sued saying, we're a third of the population and we have 1 district out of 6. We need a second district. And they won. A second district was drawn up. There was another suit from white voters who claimed that having 2 majority-minority districts, in this case, majority African-American, constituted an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. So the Supreme Court is deciding if Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act does indeed violate the 14th and 15th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, which 14th Amendment grants citizenship, equal protection, and due process, and was established in 1868, 150 years ago, to everybody born in the US. And the 15th Amendment, which is just a year later, 1870, prohibited voting discrimination based on race. If the Supreme Court decides that the VRA, the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, does indeed violate the 14th and 15th Amendments, it will nullify Section 2. And the strong belief is, if that were to happen, then the majority minority districts will go away because they will redistrict and they will crack open those districts which were majority minority. So in the case of Louisiana, African American, and they will spread those African American citizens into other districts where their votes will be diluted. And we believe this will happen in many states across the country, particularly in the South. It would mean a significant change in the composition of the House of Representatives. Huge case, will have a huge impact. Redistricting is a number one issue in terms of voting, in our view, voting equity and fairness, and making sure that voters get to choose their representatives versus the other way around. Okay.
Okay. So what
Valerie,
is the
sorry.
state? No, that's cool. So what's the state role? Each state shapes its own election laws, and our chief election officer is our Secretary of State, and in that role, they set election rules. They oversee voting. They supervise vote counts. They appoint election officials. Next slide, please. States are the voting battleground. So let's start with some good news. 25 states, as of October 2025, 25 states had enacted 30 expansive voting laws. That means they increased early voting times. They increased the number of voting centers. They expanded the number of lock boxes. However, 469 restrictive voting bills were considered in 47 states. And 29 restrictive bills from 16 states are going to be in effect for the 2026 midterms. And over 60 documenting proof of citizenship bills have been introduced in 17 states. And of course, they're trying to introduce one in California. Kansas, Georgia, Arizona, and Alabama passed these proof of citizenship laws, but they were actually struck down by the courts. However, Indiana and Wyoming still have laws in force. So many of these laws are framed as means, that's okay, to stop voter fraud. Janet, go ahead, please. Next.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in real quick.
Yeah.
The voter ID law that we assume is going to be on the ballot in November is actually not a documentary proof of citizenship, it's a voter ID, just so people are clear.
No, thank you. Thank you, thank you. So what are some of these state initiatives that we're seeing? Utah entirely eliminated universal mail-in voting. Many of these states are increasing the voter ID requirements for either in-person or mail-in voting. Oklahoma has limited voting locations, and they've shortened early voting in many cases. So in our opinion, safeguards are already in place to protect and conduct elections. And these initiatives don't safeguard voters, they discourage voters from registering to vote and casting their ballots. And it doesn't take much to discourage people from voting. Are you confused about where you should go? What times the polls are open? What ID do I need? Do I have time to take my kid home before I go vote? I mean, it's very easy to discourage someone because they just don't have time or are otherwise involved. Next slide, please. So knowing some of the laws are being put in place because people are worried about fraud, the Heritage Foundation, which is a very conservative think tank, and by the way, was one of the groups that spearheaded Project 2025, they actually conducted studies over a number of years to identify incidents of fraud. And if you look at the numbers here, it's very obvious. The incidence of fraud it's tiny. Wisconsin, 69 cases of fraud out of 45 million votes over a 20-year period. Where's my, Pennsylvania, 39 cases of fraud and 100 million total ballots over a 30-year period. And it is, as Janet likes to say, it is such a small amount that in legal terms, it's de minimis. Janet, please, it's yours now.
Yes. So the counties, as you can understand, the counties play a big role in election. And I think we already talked about this 10,000 election jurisdictions. That's just an amazing number. And there's part of that is really positive because it brings the county elections administration is in the county. And so they are very close to the people that they serve and understand kind of what people's challenges and issues in terms of travel and the like. That can really, really help. So the counties are responsible for lots of things. They set the number and location of where the voting machines are going to be. They determine if and when and what hours the early voting sites will be open. They manage poll workers. And if anybody out there is interested in being a poll worker, our county elections board can use you. It's super fun to do, although admittedly it's a really long day, but it's super fun to do and very interesting. Counties determine where the poll locations are. The challenge, I guess, with that is that county to county can have very different rules. So one more example from North Carolina. I was in Orange County in North Carolina, and in Orange County, as is true across the state, there is a high number of African American voters. And one of the decisions that the County Board of Elections had to make, the board, I think it was three people, two Republicans and a Democrat, had to make was whether they were going to be open, early voting sites were going to be open on Sunday. And the reason that was important is because in many Black churches, they do what's called, after the service, they do souls to the polls. So after the church service, they get people in buses and they go out and they all vote at the early voting center. So there was a big debate in Orange County as to whether this was going to be permitted or not. Whether it was permitted at other counties across the state of North Carolina, it could vary based on their own individual decisions. So a pretty important role, very close to the people that they serve. So the league supports, you might imagine, the league supports expansion of Voting Rights Act. We spent some time talking about Section 2 and Section 7 within the Voting Rights Act, and we believe that voting is a fundamental act and everybody has an equal opportunity to make their voices heard in our democracy. In fact, we really like to say voting is a nonpartisan issue. Voting is the foundation to our entire process. And we feel very strongly that we should beef up the Voting Rights Act and put in legislation the things that the Supreme Court has reduced in some ways and made, again, based on what happens with the Louisiana versus Calais. We also stand for statehood for Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has about 700,000 residents. And of those 700,000, a little less than half are African American. They don't have congressional representatives. They don't have two senators. They have a single non-voting delegate in Washington, D.C. We think that is not fair and frankly not American in terms of they're paying taxes. They would be eligible for the draft if we had a draft. They do all the other things and meet all the other requirements of citizenship. We think they should have equal representation. So we feel very strongly about that one. The poll that matters is the one that happens on election day. So of course, it wouldn't be a league presentation unless we talked about the upcoming election. You all probably know June 2 is our primary election. The ballots will be mailed in, less than a month now, just a few weeks away, May the 4th. You can register to vote up to May 18th. You can also register the same day if you go to a polling place. It's a provisional vote, but you can still register the same day. The vote centers open on May 28th. California has a top two or jungle primary, as it's called. And you should know, if you haven't read already, our gubernatorial race, so the race for governor, we have either 61 or 60 now with Swalwell dropping out. I'm not positive. A huge number of people who are on the ballot as candidates to be the next governor of the state. It is going to be interesting to see how the Board of Elections puts together all of our ballots, and it will be confusing. So we hope to have the opportunity to help explain that to people. It is incredibly important to mail early. You have probably read some information about changes in the way that the USPS postmarks letters and ballots. So we encourage you either to use a ballot drop box or to mail at least 7 to 10 days before June 2 to make sure that your ballot is counted appropriately. And we would encourage you to spread the word. We have a really high percentage of people in our county who actually are registered to vote. It's almost 91%. That's registration. In terms of turnout, though, it's a little different story. So I'm just looking at some statistics here. In 2022, the last midterm election, non-presidential election, there was a 56% turnout. So again, 91% who have registered, 56% turnout. In 2024, presidential election, we had a 74% turnout. In 2025, for the special election with Prop 50, we had a 56% turnout. And the average from 2022 throughout California in terms of turnout is less than 43%, which is less than nationally, which is 46%. And I only throw all those numbers at you because we don't have a registration problem in this county or in this country, I suspect. We have a turnout problem. So when you see all of the ways that many states are trying to make it harder for people to register and harder for people to vote, that just seems so boneheaded to me, frankly, and that we really should be making it easier for qualified people who are U.S. citizens who are at least 18 and live in the state are able to vote. So we encourage you to help spread the word, particularly among younger people, young adults, who have not a great track record of actually voting, although again, they are registered to vote. So I'm just going to read this. This was a statement put out by our CEO, so that's LWVUS, Selena Stewart, and the president of our board, Diana Wynn, a year ago. And I think it is so holds true now. So, from the flagrant disregard for congressional authority and governmental checks and balances to defying Supreme Court orders, one thing is abundantly clear. Our country is in a constitutional crisis. We, the people, must fight back. That is why the League of Women Voters is launching a powerful new initiative that is called Unite and Rise 8.5. Through Unite and Rise 8.5, we will engage and mobilize 8.5 million voters to protect and preserve our democracy. And the 8.5 number comes from studies by a political scientist named Erica Chenoweth with Harvard University that looked at how change happens in different countries. And the hypothesis is that, after study, that if you could mobilize 3.5% of the voting population to stand up and protest, whether that protest is being in a rally, whether that protest is contacting your congressional representative, whether that protest is voting and making your voice heard. If you can do that, we will have the change we demand. So the 8.5 million comes from that, and we are doing our part of it here, the League of Women Voters, Diablo Valley. So what can you do? You can definitely vote, and you can get everybody you know to vote, particularly in this primary. It is an incredibly important primary. Of those 60 or so gubernatorial candidates, only the top 2 are going to go onto the November ballot. So you won't be making a choice about who's on the November ballot unless you vote in June. And also, if you would like more information about Unite and Rise 8.5, we would love to have you join us. And I think our contact information for both Valerie and myself will be at the end of the PowerPoint. So that's the end. We would love to answer any questions that you have. We definitely have time to do that. So I think I should probably stop sharing here. There we go. And Valerie, was there anything else that you wanted to say?
No, I think we should go. There are some great questions here. Let's start. Janet, Since the post office, you mentioned this a little bit, since the post office is facing budget challenges, will our ballots be processed in a timely way? And how soon should we submit our vote in order to be sure they are received in time?
Yeah, I think the rule of thumb for us is 7 to 10 days in advance, or take it to a ballot drop box if you possibly can. And if time has run out, you can always take your completed ballot to your polling place and drop it off at the polling place. And you can actually, you're going to put it into a separate box that's all secure, et cetera. The processing times in our local Board of Elections are really good, and they do, I think it's a 4 times they check to make sure everything is there and everything is as it should be. So it is highly transparent and it is very focused on security. And I always have, I think you can click on it on the Board of Elections website. I always make sure that when I mail my ballot, I can get a text when it gets received by them and when it gets processed by them. So I will know when they get my ballot. And if a red flag goes up and they haven't responded, I know something's going on.
And one of the other questions is, where can you get an official list of ballot drop boxes? And you go to the county clerk site. If you literally type in Google, where are the official drop boxes for the ballot? They'll refer you to the county clerk site. And they have a beautiful list, very easily available right there. We did have a question from the audience. What is the argument for voter restriction laws? And I know one of them is they're afraid of fraud, which we're not sure where that comes from, but Janet.
Well, I totally agree. I think the voter restriction laws, particularly the SAVE Act, is thought to be important because of these suspected issues of fraud. And as Valerie went through, the Heritage Foundation studied millions of files from decades of elections, and there was, 0.0000006%. It doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because people don't try to make it happen. It means it gets caught, some too. There isn't a lot of it, but it also does not get caught. So that's the basic premise. The administration has said some really, I think, rather disturbing things about if the SAVE Act doesn't pass and if mail-in voting isn't prohibited, then they will not win the midterm elections. And I think there clearly is a partisan effort to put these laws and regulations in place as a way to keep certain voters from voting, not all voters. I'm not sure that's even well thought out, but I think that's part of the thinking around a lot of these provisions that go in. Having said that, as we mentioned, there probably will be a voter ID initiative on the November ballot, and that would require, I guess, picture ID when you go to vote, et cetera. And on your mail-in ballot, you'll have to put some identifying information on it. The part of that is most problematic to us is that it would also, as I understand it, require that the boards of elections send in data files for review by the federal government, the system that the federal government uses, which I understand is also called SAVE, S-A-V-E. And the concern with that is, one, it's not a federal function. This is a state function. Elections are run by states, not by the feds. So this is in some ways seen as a bit of a power grab by the federal government. And two, there is really strong concern that if the federal government is looking at voter rolls, that there will be voter purges, and that people who are qualified to vote and actual voters and registered to vote will just be popped off, and they will, oh, whoops, but when they show up to vote for the next time, they will not be on the voter rolls. So there was a lot of concern about that. The integrity of the system, the integrity of the process, and the use of systems that are not well matched to trying to find people who are truly fraudulent, as small as they may be.
Fair enough. Somebody in the audience said that the primary can also determine some local races. If a candidate receives 50 plus 1, the race is not on the ballot in November. Absolutely. So want to share that. Very, very good point. Someone's also asking about the SCOTUS cases again. Could you go over Louisiana versus Calais again, please?
Yes, Louisiana versus Calais, and it's a complicated case. So it's a redistricting case. So both of the cases that we talked about are redistricting cases, which to me is just the essence of how our democratic process is set up. It is how we are able to get representatives to serve our needs, et cetera, right? One person, one vote. So there has been one minority majority district in Louisiana, which has, as I said, a little over a third of the population is African American. That's out of 6 districts, so 1 out of 6. And if that a third would be 2. So there was a suit that was filed that was won, and the legislature was required to put in a second all black district or majority
And they
black
were
district.
required under Section 2 to do
Yes,
this.
it was
the Voter
required,
Rights
right.
Act.
As a result of that second district going in place, there was, as I understand it, almost immediately a group of white civil rights groups or whatever who sued, saying that was an illegal racial gerrymander. Meaning you're putting together a second group now of African American voters into a single district, and that's a racial gerrymander, which it kind of is a racial gerrymander, right? Makes sense. So the court is determining whether doing that, in fact, goes against the 14th and 15th Amendments to our U.S. Constitution. And if they determine that, yes, that is the case, it would invalidate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So we think what would happen is the legislatures would decide, oh, we're just going to redistrict as a result of this, and it would spread in this case, the African American voters amongst many districts, and they would not have a majority in any single district. I hope that made sense. It's a confusing case, but redistricting is where it's all being played out. And if that were to happen, and we think the decision will come by June, I don't think they can put it off for another term, then it will change the landscape across the country, but mostly in the South. But it would change the landscape of how our districts look and whether there is minority representation or not.
And we already have data of what happened when Section 5 was dropped.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not supposition that something is going to happen.
Yep. One thing we haven't talked about, forgive me, we haven't talked about Vote 411. Vote 411 is the name of the voting education system, election education system that the League has across the country. It's vote411.org. I think maybe Sean talked about it at the beginning or whatever. It is your one-stop shop to get everything you need about the election. If you want to see that list of the 61 gubernatorial candidates, it's already there. Go to vote411.org. You can already see it. Some of the local races are not yet in, but they will be very shortly. You can see the propositions on the ballot. Because we have some on the primary ballot. You can see the candidates. You can hear from the candidates in their own words about what their platforms are like and what they believe in and what they want to focus on. You can get information about what your ballot looks like, what the election rules are, like when you have to do what, when it has to come in, when it's going to be mailed, all of that stuff, where your polling place is if you want to go in person. All of that is on vote411.org. So please make use of that. It's a terrifically robust tool.
We have a couple of other questions. Can census requirements for 2030 census be determined during the Trump administration? So census requirements, can they be determined during the Trump administration? And could they be reversed by a new administration?
All I can tell you is that there has been discussion in this subcommittee in the House about adding the citizenship question, which came up, if I remember right, it came up during the first administration.
It did.
Wanted to add that, right?
It came up before the 2020. Absolutely.
Yes. So I just determined there can be statutory changes. So Congress could say, we want this to happen. That could happen during the Trump term. Could it be undone? I would think it would have to be undone statutorily. I'm not sure exactly how that works. So Susan, if you want to tell us, if you know the answer to that, I know you're really good at all this.
If somebody knows,
jump in, please do.
Yeah, we require a constitutional amendment. The issue of the of the census in the Constitution is clear. And to make any changes to the census requirements would require an amendment to the Constitution.
So it could not be done statutorily to add a question about citizenship?
They could.
I thought it could actually.
They could, because that's in the collection of the data. It's not the actual conducting of the census. But it's a question we will have to research.
Do you know, Sean?
I don't know on that particular
Yeah.
issue. We've been down this once before a few years back, and I thought it was determined that they couldn't change it by one of the courts, but I don't think it was the Supreme Court. I'm not.
Thank you. And I think somebody else asked here, if the census determines representation in the House of Representatives, we know that's how that's done. And if voting suppressions such as the SAVE Act get implemented, many voters potentially would be purged regardless of their political party. Would this not also affect representation?
Well, representation is as it stands today and per the Constitution based on the number of people here, whether they're citizens or not. So it wouldn't, I don't think it would be impacted by purging people
From the voter
rolls.
No, but the fact is, who gets elected would be if the rolls are purged.
Yep.
So yes, representation's impacted, but we're talking about two different types. There's the
Yes.
actual count of the people who are put into the roll, and then those who are elected. Okay. Any other questions?
As you can see by this, we depend on each other within the league to help answer some of these questions.
Yeah.
It is a very collegial organization. We invite you to join us.
Yes.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Susan.
Yes.
Yeah, and going back to that last thing, I'm thinking about the issue of citizenship and what you were sharing earlier in your presentation about, having to determine for the census, the citizenship question. If you have the citizenship question on the census and you put people who are not being counted, because isn't representation based on total population?
Yes.
So if we purge individuals not considered citizens, but still members of the United States because they live here, then that will alter representation, which will skew the numbers in the House of Representatives. It will also skew how much money each state receives.
That's the big one.
Because that's is dependent on the numbers of people that live in your state, how much money we pay to the federal government that we'll receive back for roads and schools and whatnot.
I totally agree. I think also, Sean, that the question itself will mean people won't answer the census. So
Right.
they will just say, not going to answer it, and they will talk about an undercount. There'll be complete undercount of complete households, whether they include citizens and non-citizens or they're all non-citizens. So the whole undercount, it would determine overall representation based on the numbers per House district.
Yep.
It's 2:00.
Thank you, you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Unless there are any other questions, we welcome you to join us. We welcome you to join Unite and Rise and get more information about that. It's a big initiative for us. We're a super fun group to work with, and we do enjoy having men as members too. We have a lot of male members, and we encourage them to join as well. So please feel free to join us. And again, thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Well, thank you. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, Diablo Valley, the League of Women Voters, West Contra Costa County Library, and CCTV, I want to extend a genuine thank you to our presenters today, Janet Hoy and Valerie Ventre-Hutton, for being here and giving us such informative and timely information about 2026 elections, a changing landscape. Thank you to Vanessa. Oops, I think I lost something. Hold on a sec. Thank you to Vanessa Cardenas for providing the Spanish interpretation of today's webinar. This service is jointly funded by the Contra Costa County Library and the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley. I also want to thank our audience for attending today and for their important questions. This Community Conversations program is being rebroadcast on CCTV on the following days and times that you see here on the screen. Community Conversations Elections 2026, A Changing Landscape, is also available on the YouTube channel of the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley. Our next community conversation topic and date, which take place in September. There is a hiatus here. Stay tuned for the date and time and topic as we go into the summer months soon. Community Conversations is a partnership between the League of Women Voters of Diablo Valley, the League of Women Voters West Contra Costa County, the Contra Costa County Library, and CCTV. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. The League never endorses or opposes candidates or political parties. We influence public policy through education and advocacy. We invite community members to join the League and support the work we do. Thank you so much for being here today.